We are joined here by Republican Secretary of State Wayne Williams, who is running for re-election. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me here today, Kyle.
It seems to me like so much of the work of the Secretary of State is administrative as opposed to partisan or ideological. So is there any reason why Coloradans are better served with a Republican in that office than a Democrat?
I think the actual issue you want to look at is what that individual has done and what their record is in terms of elections, business filings, in terms of managing an office and 130 employees and the processes that are there. That's what I've focused on in this campaign. I'm honored that I've got support from Republicans, unaffiliates, Democrats. The majority of actually clerk and recorders who are Democrats have endorsed me, despite the fact I happen to be a Republican. And that's because I've run the office in a nonpartisan and fair way and done it in a way that makes it easy for Coloradans to participate in the process. We have, this is National Voter Registration Day. We have the highest percentage of registered voters of any state in America right here in Colorado. I've made it easier than ever before with just at a high school today, talking about the Eliza Pickrell Route Award to high schools that get 85% of their graduating class to register. You can register online at govotecolorado.com. I added texting, so you can now text CO to vote. So there's a host of things we've done. And then, first, administratively, and then working through the legislature, got unanimous approval for automatic voter registration in Colorado. So you get a driver's license. It's an easy automatic process. Same thing if you move, we automatically update through that. So we've made it as easy as convenient as possible.
All right, you've been able to brag on your accomplishments. Now let's return to my question. Is there any reason why Coloradans are better served by having a Republican in this office than a Democrat?
I think that, as I said, the main difference is the experience the respective candidates have.
You're talking about the difference between you and your opponent, not an ideological one. Let me ask you this. You love to talk about the safety, the security, the integrity of Colorado's election systems. Do you regret the comments you made a few years ago that cast doubt on our elections, talking about the influence of union bosses and the idea that the post office can't handle our ballots properly? You know,
they're actually in Conejos County. So let's talk about reality. There was an election for sheriff, Democratic primary, in which a number of ballots showed up late. In fact, so many ballots that it could have changed the result of the election. The losing Democratic candidate sued, saying you should invalidate the election, count these ballots that arrived late. I addressed that as Secretary of State by providing 24/7 drop boxes across the state. So I worked to provide funding with counties everywhere from rural areas to urban areas so that we no longer have to rely on that critical linchpin. And the result is, Kyle, that 2/3 of Coloradans have chosen to return their mail ballot via those drop boxes.
Do you trust the Postal Service now to handle our ballots?
I trust them, but they also accept a certain error rate. So it's not a perfect system. We work closely with them to try to ensure ballots get to the right people and ballots get back. But with the elimination of regional mail facilities, particularly outside of Denver, Grand Junction, every other place, the mail now goes to one of those places or to New Mexico before it comes back to the clerk. So if you wait till the last minute to return your ballot, as lots of Coloradans like to, it may not get there in time. So I trust them to try to do their job, but in working with the National Post Office, they've acknowledged that you really need to mail your ballot a week ahead of time. So we have to have a way of voters who cast their ballot during that last week of having that ballot counted.
And the other half of that, a few years back you went on Fox News, talked about union bosses pulling shenanigans with mail-in ballots. Do you think that's happening?
I actually talked about a whole host of different people who could try to influence. You said union bosses
and employers, and I'm asking, do you still believe that there's something going on with that?
I believe that there is the possibility that someone tries to influence you at your home or at your office or any place else you might be. Most people are just fine with that. But one of the things we did to address that is pass a bill through the legislature this last year that makes vote trading illegal. So you can't sell that vote to someone else. You can't be intimidated to give that vote to someone else. So I've worked to address that legislatively as well. In fact, we've passed 25 of the 29 bills that my office has championed during the last 4 years. That's through a Democratic House, a Republican Senate, signed by a Democratic governor. In this last session, we had 4 major bills. There were 0 no votes in the entire Senate. So we've worked to address some of those weaknesses and provide protection to Coloradans to make sure their vote can be counted.
Are Colorado's voting systems safe from outside interference?
Absolutely. One of the first things I did after I became Secretary of State is adopt new standards after trying out 4 different vendor systems in 8 different counties, we adopted new standards that require a voter verifiable paper ballot. That means you as the voter, even if you vote on a machine, can look at that ballot and see that that machine took your touches or whatever other method you used to cast that ballot and interpreted them correctly on the paper ballot. Then we did the nation's first risk limiting audit. We've done that for the last 2 elections, and that's where we take the cast vote record as the machine has interpreted it when it went through and tabulated it, and we tell the clerk, go pull the 4th ballot out of the 8th box and the 3rd ballot out of the 6th box. And we have a bipartisan team of judges compare that ballot to the actual cast vote record. And that's why we can tell you, by the way, every county in the state passed it. That's why we can tell you that nobody in Moscow, nobody in Beijing changed a single vote here in Colorado. That's why the Washington Post and the Homeland Security Secretary have both called Colorado the safest state in America to vote.
Is there voter fraud in our state?
There are small elements of it. We work to prosecute individuals who engage in it. There have been several who've been convicted over the last few years, but we are a very good state in preventing that. One of the things that's critical in that process, we check the signatures of every one of those mail ballots that comes back. And so the presidential election, about 2.7 million mail ballots came back. In every single county in this state, a bipartisan team of election judges reviewed any questionable signatures and then notified the voter if there was an issue. That process works very well in Colorado.
When voter fraud does happen, you said it's not systemic. What does it actually look like? What is practically happening when voter fraud happens in our state?
So I'll give you a couple of different examples that have resulted in convictions. We had an individual, actually a former chairman of a party, who voted...
Care to tell us which party?
It was the Republican Party. This
Please go on.
Not limited to particular groups or individuals, but this particular individual cast a ballot for his estranged wife and turned that in. We had about 38 individuals who appear to have voted in Colorado and another state. One of those just pled guilty and paid a fine for that not recently, not long ago. So those are 2 of the types that you see. Someone who knows somebody and can get their signature through signature verification, occasionally doing that. We see occasionally somebody voting in more than one state, which is also illegal. We have occasionally seen individuals who register, same-day register, and then when we send the confirmation card to the post office, through the post office to the individual, the post office says no such person at this address. Those are isolated instances. And we work to prevent those. We've got 64 county clerks around the state who work really hard in ensuring that your vote is counted, it's counted accurately, and it's not diluted by someone who didn't have the legal ability to vote.
When you have Republicans on the national level, including President Trump, talking about systemic voter fraud, millions of people voting illegally, casting doubt on the safety and security of our elections, does that have a tangible impact in Colorado?
Has an impact just as stories about Russian interference do. That's why we work so hard to ensure the integrity of the election here. I've been very clear that those types of systemic vote fraud or voter suppression did not occur in Colorado. We've got great processes to protect our Colorado voters. The reason I get concerned when people hear these is kind of reflected in a recent NPR poll that said 31% of the people in the U.S. were concerned that their vote might be tampered with in the election. The fact that 3 in 10 Americans have that concern illustrates why Colorado's processes that have been adopted under my watch are so critical for the rest of the nation as well.
The president set up a commission to go looking for voter fraud, and you said that you would comply with a request to turn over publicly accessible voter records, and you were criticized for that. Looking back, would you do anything differently?
I will always follow the law. My job as Secretary of State is to follow the law. I give the voter data roll, the publicly accessible parts only, to the Democratic Party, to the Republican Party, to libertarians, to people who are running a ballot issue that I might happen to disagree with, that most Coloradans might even disagree with. We also provide it when a presidential task force asks for it. But all they get is the same publicly available information that every single person, Democrat or Republican, is able to get. Kyle, it's a very dangerous thing when someone says, I wouldn't give it to people I don't like. If you had a partisan Secretary of State who said, I only give those voter data rolls to the people I like, not to the people I don't like, That's the type of partisanship that we have not had in the Secretary of State under my watch.
Your Democratic opponent, Jena Griswold, has suggested that you only have to comply with that request for information if it is lawful, and that your office should have looked at federal law to see if the federal request comported with federal law. Do you have any such right?
I have a right to follow Colorado law, which says I have 3 days to provide the data unless they give me more time to do that. And that's the Colorado Open Records Law, a law that the station uses on a regular basis when you're trying to get records. To try and throw up roadblocks or barriers that I don't throw up when Democrats seek that information, when Libertarians, when Republicans, when any other group, would be contrary to the fairness that this office is supposed to have.
Your opponent's been critical of the fact that you are also doing some outside work while you serve as Secretary of State. Who else are you working for? You know,
I work 50 to 60 hours a week as Secretary of State, and it is true that mostly in the evenings. I think the filing she asked me about I did at 9:57 p.m. That I perform work for other individuals. I never do anything that is election law. I never do anything for any client that has any business in front of the Secretary of State's office.
Why won't you tell us who you work for?
Well, as you may know, there are ethical requirements that prohibit lawyers from disclosing who their clients are. So that would be the first reason, is it would be unethical. That, to me, is a pretty critical one. The other part is I never do anything that has anything to do with my office.
And how would anybody know if you don't disclose your clients?
Because you would see a filing that I did in front of the Secretary of State's office.
So the idea is to check who you're working for. Somebody should be going and pulling all these filings and then should divine who it is that you're working for?
There is no filing in the Secretary of State's office, Kyle. And that's simply a matter of public record. It's also a matter of what I told voters 4 years ago that I would continue to do. I've got 4 kids who've been going to college. I've got 4 kids in their 20s. And yes, I supplement my income. I'm not the only person in Colorado who has 2 jobs.
Your predecessor did the same thing, said that the position didn't pay enough and that you needed the outside work. Is that the issue? It doesn't pay enough?
My predecessor was an election lawyer. I'm an employment lawyer. There's a very different category of our areas of expertise. You see the same thing, for example, with the governor writing a book. There are people who do outside employment of very interest, perfectly appropriate as long as they're doing their job. And so the question that is really the relevant question, by the way, she knows this because I'm the only candidate who's actually filed their income taxes and made them publicly available. But that's the job. The job is to get the job done for Coloradans. So the safest state in America, the highest voter registration in America. Haven't talked about the business side yet. We've got the lowest business filing fees in America. I run my office entirely on those business fees. There are no tax dollars involved in running the Secretary of State's office. We've also made it easier. So the governor and I have worked together on mybiz.colorado.gov, making it easier than ever before for a business to be established in Colorado. We've added over 100,000 businesses during the time I've been Secretary of State. And we've done it by making it easy for people to do the process and accessible so that you as an individual can help live that American dream. 1 million Coloradans make their living from a small business, either as an employee or an owner.
I told you we were going to talk for 10 minutes. You've given some fulsome answers, so I have 2 questions remaining, if you'll indulge me. How do you assess your office's handling of Colorado's first ever primaries open to independents? There certainly was an error rate. We knew there was going to be an error rate. Do you feel like your office did everything it could to reduce that rate?
We did. As you're aware, the Blue Book warned that there might be as much of a 7% error rate. We engaged in a media campaign. We contacted folks. We had all sorts of events around the state. We worked closely with this station and others in getting the word out. We kept that error rate to 2.3%, so about 1/3 of what was projected. I'm happy with that. There's still more work to do. As we go forward 2 years from now, we're going to continue to work as people get more used to that process to make it, that error rate, as low as we possibly can get it. We saw some of our counties, Adams County, where Stan Martin's clerk, for example, managed to get an error rate of about 0.6%. And so we've shared some of the things they did with other counties so we can look at that and adopt best practices around the state.
And you had other counties like Pueblo County that had considerably more trouble.
There were counties that varied in their approach. Adams had a separate flyer that they stuck in the ballot packet that really called the attention to it. We are working to share that information with our county clerks. You know, in 2020, we've actually got 2 of these elections in which unaffiliates were able to vote. But for a lot of them, this was a totally new process. We have never, ever before sent you a ballot and said, don't vote it. We've never said, don't vote on a particular race. We've always custom crafted your ballot so it only has the things you can vote on.
And we know just from what we heard here on Next that people had a lot of questions, even after we had been talking about it. Last question. This is more broadly speaking. Do you have concerns about your opponent, Jena Griswold's ability to do the job as Secretary of State, or are you simply making the argument that I have the experience and I can do it better?
I have concerns. Before I was Secretary of State, I ran elections at the local level. I think that experience has proved invaluable for me. I think it's enabled me to be a much more effective Secretary of State. Not only has she not run elections, most of the time she doesn't even vote in the Secretary of State's race. I think 4 of the last 6 elections she's not voted. So I think someone who's involved in the process has been trusted by people. I've been hired by Democrats to run elections for them. I think that kind of record makes a difference. And without that background, I would not have been as effective as I have been as Secretary of State. I'm the only certified election registration administrator who's been Secretary of State in Colorado history. I think that qualification is also helpful, where you actually know what you're doing. I also think running an office, a record that I have of running an office very successfully, doing it fiscally, frugally, and innovatively, is important as well. I'll be down in Austin on Friday accepting an award from Google Cloud for the innovations our office has done in election security. I don't think that background's there, and I think that is a relevant factor in the election.
Secretary of State Wayne Williams, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you around.
Kyle, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.